The ink still smelled sharp in the gym as the last steel door slammed. The echo rolled across the high rafters and fell, dull, into the scuffed linoleum and the folding tables that had been pushed to the walls. The concert was over. The cheers had drained out like floodwater through a grate. Men in denim and khaki moved in slow, reluctant streams toward gates that shut on clocks, not their own. Johnny Cash stood with a pen in his hand that was not his favorite, a cheap ballpoint someone had found in a box of forms, and he felt the weight of something that was not the pen at all. In the next 22 minutes, you will see why Johnny Cash stayed after San Quentin to sign one inmate's book and what he wrote when Glen finally reached him. He shifted his feet. The soles of his boots made a small sound against the floor. A guard called down the hall without looking at him. The gym smelled of sweat and wool and coffee gone cold in a cardboard cup. June wasn't here. The cameras weren't here anymore either. Not really. The big eyes of television that drink every move and never say thank you had been turned toward the trucks. Backstage had dissolved into a place with no front and no back. There was only a man in black and a line of men in prison blues who did not seem ready to let the moment die. They came quiet, some with hands in pockets to keep them from shaking, some with eyes wild and laughing still, some with faces closed like doors that had been shut for years and did not know how to open for 5 minutes just because a song had worked like a key. Johnny nodded at each one. Took a hand, put his other hand on a shoulder sometimes, signed a scrap, a cuff, a photograph torn from a paper. The guard closer to him had an expression Johnny knew well, the face of a man whose job was to keep time moving and whose bones remembered a moment when time had moved without him. The guard didn't rush him. He only watched. One by one they passed, and the hallway ran on into another hallway that smelled the same, and the men were shepherded by men who had keys. Johnny could have gone. He had told the driver he needed 10 minutes. He had told the producer he would be in the car by the top of the hour. But the line hadn't ended, and his feet had not moved toward the door. He looked down and realized the point of the pen had made a small blue dot on the table where he hadn't written yet. What does a man ask for when he cannot ask for freedom? The man in front of him said, "Sir, would you write my mother's name? It'll make her believe me." Johnny did. He wrote the mother's name slow. When he handed the paper back, the man didn't look at it right away. He looked at Johnny, and in that pause the prison seemed to remember it was a prison. Voices rose at the far end. A door clanged, and the door after that. A wheel on a cart squeaked the way wheels do when no one oils them, because oil belongs to people who leave. He had learned, over years and nights in motels that smelled like cheap soap, to feel when a moment asked for more than a note or a word on a program. He felt it now before he saw it. A figure near the end of the hall was not moving like the others. He held a small book in both hands, still closed, like men hold a Bible when they are not sure what will be required of them next. The man's hair was close-cropped. He had the thin look of men who live inside rules and inside their own thoughts. His eyes moved to Johnny and did not move away again. "Sir," someone said behind him with a laugh that was too loud, "you saved my life." Johnny had learned what to do with those words, too. He shook the man's hand. "I'm glad you're still here," he said, and he meant it. He meant it plain. He meant it simple. The man nodded, swallowed, and the guard touched his arm and steered him down the hall, like water finds the easiest channel. Now he could see the book. The man in prison blues who held it was close enough that Johnny could read the pressed leather on the cover where a boy's fingers had once worried it smooth. Not prison leather, not made in a program. something ordered from a catalog years ago. Something small and cheap and proud of being something. Johnny knew that weight, too. The moment before an ask, when a man counts the cost of being told no. "You, Glen?" Johnny said. The man's lips moved before his voice found him. He nodded. His knuckles went white where they pinched the small book. Johnny had not planned to say that name, but he had read it for 2 years, a letter a week, sometimes 2, folded into the bus mail, tucked behind schedules, traveled from road to road, paper that smelled like the place it came from, damp, bleach, metal, sometimes coffee, once a faint oil of peanut butter that made him smile in a motel room at 2 in the morning. Glen wrote about his mother, about a girl he had promised to be better for and wasn't, about a brother, about a fight with a man who threw the first punch and didn't go to the place. Punches take you when someone is watching. He wrote about the music and how it made the bad nights bearable because it sounded like a man not embarrassed to say he'd done wrong. Johnny didn't write back every time. He didn't write back most times. He had learned there were letters you answer with a song, because the man on the other end doesn't need another envelope to open. He needs a breath he can hold for 3 minutes and change. Tonight had been 3 minutes and change, times 10. The cameras had wanted rebellion. The men had wanted a hand on the shoulder that said, "You are not invisible to God." Johnny had wanted to be as much of a man as the song said he was. Glen took a step closer. "Mr. Cash," he said, voice small and careful, "I know you got to ride. I wrote." "I know you wrote," Johnny said. He heard his own voice and felt a steadiness in it that hadn't been there on the stage when he had to be louder than the steel and the television lights. "I know your hand." Glen looked at his own hand then, as if it belonged to a different man than the one he woke up inside of every day. He turned the book and opened it. The first page had other names in other inks, names from boys he'd known when he still borrowed the feeling of being a person from people who saw him as one. Names from men inside who traded names, the way men who cannot trade anything else trade what they have. He held the book out like an offering. The ballpoint scratched over thin paper with a dry whisper. "Make it out to my mama," Glen said, and then, quickly, like someone who takes back a thing too rare to be handled by another, "No, sir, just your name," he swallowed, "and mine, if that's all right." Johnny looked up. The guard had moved 2 steps away and was looking down the hall with the posture of a man who gives a private moment a chance to be born and live a few seconds before the world sees it and points at it. The driver's voice floated from a distance. A question formed as a name. Johnny did not answer. He put the pen down for a second. The silence grew around that small act, the way a church grows around a prayer. He remembered the boy in him who had watched a brother bleed, because a blade does not bargain, and a father who didn't know what to do with a boy who could hear a song in a field and bring it home like supper. He felt the familiar pull toward the door that would take him away from this man and let the night fold itself back into an easy story a person could tell at breakfast. And he felt the other pull, the weight in his palm that was not the pen. He picked it up again. "Spell it for me," he said softly. "Slow." "Glen," the man said, and the letters came out round, like he had chewed them once to make sure they were not too hard for his teeth. "Glen," Johnny said, and the sound landed between them like a small, clean thing set down on a table for 2. He wrote his own name first, because you always start with the truth you carry around in your chest, whether you like it or not. Then he wrote the other. He did not write a sentence that could be turned into a headline. He did not write a lesson. He did not write a promise no man should make over a piece of paper in a room like this. He wrote the names, and he pressed a little harder on the last letter, and he put the dot where it belonged. He did not know it yet, but the extra hour would cost him more than sleep. Glen watched his hands. Some men stare at a signature the way they stare at an open sky through a fence, as if the name could jump. Glen watched like a man absorbing, not calculating. "Thank you," he said. "I wrote you because I ain't heard my name said without a number in a while." "I know," Johnny said, and he did. Numbers fasten onto a person like burrs in a cotton shirt. Once they stick, you can forget what it's like to be called anything else. He looked at the book, then at Glen, and some hardness eased in his own ribs. He had signed 1,000,000 things, he thought. Records and napkins and guitars and faces of people who were not old enough yet to regret tattoos. He had signed court papers. He had signed checks that were larger than the ones he used to cash for rent at a window with bars. He had signed the front of some things and the back of others. But this felt like he was writing inside a room barely big enough for two men to sit down and tell the truth without flinching. A voice from the hall floated again. "Mr. Cash, bus is warming." The guard took one step closer, as if to remind him there were other clocks in the world. Johnny nodded without looking up. "Give me a minute," he said. He didn't say to whom. Glen breathed through his mouth, slow. His chest rose and fell like a man on water who has finally remembered to float. He said, almost to the book, "I wrote because I thought if I put it in your hands, part of it would be lighter. I don't mean the time. I know about time. I mean what the time sits on." Johnny could hear the lines in the letters again, as if they were being read in this room, not 2 years ago, in some motel near Dawn. The lines about a brother who taught him how to ride a bike and a father who knew how to fix everything except what was wrong in him. The lines about a fight that had more to do with shame than with anger. The lines that circled a prayer without saying it, because some men learn to walk around praying like it's a sleeping dog. He put his hand on the book. Not heavy, not a show, just there. Glen did not move his own. He held the other edge the way a person holds the corner of a table at a wake when he does not know what to do with his hands. The prison hummed around them like a machine that was always on whether anyone was paying attention or not. It was not the autograph he came for. It was to be seen, once, as a man. Those words did not happen out loud. They happened in the space where men look at each other and agree to believe the same thing at the same time, even if there is no one in the room to certify it. Johnny felt something clear in him. He had been cheered by rooms full of people. He had been dragged by the throat across the floor by days he never told anyone about. But this felt like something you do for the person you intend to be when no one else is watching. A second guard stepped into the frame of the doorway, not close, just where a man can be close and polite at the same time. "Sir," he said, nodding not to rush, but to plant a flag in the ground, called "Moving On." Johnny nodded back and did not move yet. He put the pen down again, and he rested it there. "A name written in ink can hold a man in place," he said softly. Not to the guard, and not entirely to Glen, to the room, to himself, to the boy who wrote letters with blocky hands and waited and wrote again when no answer came. The guard looked at the floor as if something private had passed between people he did not need to see in full. He stepped back. Glen's eyes were wet but not spilling. "Mr. Cash," he whispered, and the whisper was the only delicate thing about him. "Do you remember the one where I said I'd try to keep my brother from here?" "I remember," Johnny said. He did. He remembered the ache that sat between the sentences like a man sits between two doors, not sure which one is locked. "How old are they?" 17 and 15, Glen said, and in the words there was a stretch of field that had nothing to do with razor wire. They come see me when Mama can afford the gas. I told 'em, don't be proud, be steady. Johnny breathed in. The breath went all the way down. That's good advice, he said, and it wasn't a stage line. It was a man speaking to a man the way he would speak to himself if he could stand outside his own body and not be afraid of what he'd find. He slid the book back an inch. You want me to write to them boys? He asked, and the words surprised him because he had not decided them before they came. He knew better than to promise letters. He also knew what the pen had done to him tonight, just sitting in his hand like it had weight. Glen shook his head. No, sir, he said quickly, as if to save him from a promise that would be hard to keep. Just, if you see 'em out there sometime, don't forget their names when they say 'em. I won't, Johnny said, and he had a feeling he was saying more than he could explain to anybody with a schedule in their hand. The room settled then, the way a song settles at the last verse when you don't have to prove anything to the chorus anymore. He took the pen and wrote the date, small, in the corner, because some men need a stake in the ground to tie a rope to when the floodwater pretends to be the tide. He did not sign a flourish. He wrote plain. He wrote true. When he finished, he put the cap on the cheap pen like it was a good one. He looked at the guard. He looked at Glen. He looked at the hallway that led to everything outside of this, and he stayed a breath longer on purpose. When a door clanged, who stayed because he chose to, not because he had to? He handed the book back. Glen did not snatch it. He received it like you receive a newborn you were not sure would breathe. He closed it and put his palm on the cover for a heartbeat, then took his hand away, as if to say, I will carry this myself. Thank you, he said again, and Johnny heard in it all the weeks of Sunday afternoons that had fed the weeks that followed. The guard made a small, respectful motion with his hand. The men to the right were waiting. The men to the left had to go. And the man in black felt the ache in his feet. He stood. The chair legs drew a line across the floor that sounded like a tiny, ordinary thing. He didn't look back down at the page because you don't admire a thing like that. You leave it where it belongs. You let it be what it is in the life of the person who has to live with it. Take care of your mama, he said. He did not add more because more tonight would be mostly about the one who had the freedom to add it. Glen nodded. Yes, sir. His mouth shaped more words that didn't come out. Then he turned when the guard touched his elbow and moved into the stream of men who were going back where they were supposed to be until they were told otherwise. He did not look down at the book as he walked. He kept his eyes forward like a man walking down a church aisle, not to be seen, but to keep from falling. Johnny watched him until he felt foolish for watching, and this time he was glad to feel foolish. He picked the pen up again and put it in his pocket like a strange relic from a service no one had planned. He lifted his hand to the driver without turning his head. Hold on, he said, because he needed to say it to someone. The hallway had a hum, and inside the hum he heard what a man sounds like when his name has been called, not as a number, but as himself. He did not know what the calling would change, or if it would change anything at all that could be measured by paper or a file cabinet. He only knew it had been his job tonight to do a small, faithful thing, and to do it all the way to the end. He took a step toward the door, then stopped and turned back. There is a way to leave a room that does not leave the people in it. He went back to the table. He opened the top page where his name and Glen's name sat in the dry shine. He pressed his fingers to the paper the way men touch the wood of a pew when no one is looking. Then he closed the book slowly and set it where Glen would find it after count, after the next door. He had learned that ink could keep a man from slipping away. He reached for the handle. The cold metal woke the bones in his palm. A breath went in. A breath went out. He stepped into the hall where the light was a little harsher and the air smelled more like bleach and less like men. He looked once more down the corridor, where a figure in prison blues was already another figure among others, and he made peace, in that second, with the size of the thing he had given. He was the only free man in that hallway, and he chose to stay.